so grateful that the staff brought the senator and the representative here tonight, and that we can learn directly from them all the wonderful things they're doing for us, and also they're interested in hearing from us what more they could do for us, I think, right? So thank you very much to Representative Megan Kilcoyne and Senator Robin Kennedy.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Meg Kilcoyne. I see a few familiar faces in here, but in case any of you who haven't met me before, I am your state representative. I've represented the town of Berlin since getting elected in 2020, so still in my second term. And before that, I served as legislative director for the previous state rep, Harold Naughton. So I long ago found a deep love of serving our local communities and serving in state office and using that and being able to use that to improve the lives of the people around us. I grew up in this area. I grew up down the road in Sterling, and my family's all from Clinton. And even now I have family all over the 6 communities I represent. I have cousins that live here in Berlin, folks in Boylston, in Clinton and Sterling, and Northborough. That's actually all 6 towns that I represent. So Berlin, Boylston, Clinton, Lancaster, and 1 precinct in Northborough. And I share Berlin, Boylston, and Northborough with the senator here. But I think the thing that I love about events like this is this gives us an opportunity to kind of talk a little bit, obviously, about what we've been working on, but more importantly, hear from everybody here. I think it's always really, one thing I want to bring to the role is I want people to feel comfortable talking to me. I want people to feel comfortable approaching me, and I want people to know that we're a resource. Whether you want to reach out on a legislative issue, or even if you just need some help and need to figure out a way in which maybe we can connect you with the state service, maybe we can help you navigate the bureaucracy at state government, or even connect you with someone who can help you if it's something that we can't do within our own resources. But I think forums like this are great because I think people have this idea that government isn't listening to them. I think the thing that we can all do is the best way that you can make change and make positive change is focus on the local level, focus on your local community. So I'm excited to talk to you all more tonight, hear about what your thoughts are, and hopefully have a great dialogue about what's happening here in Berlin and the Commonwealth as well.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Rep. Kilcoyne. I'm Robin Kennedy. I'm your state senator. I'm still finishing out my first term in the legislature, and grateful to be able to join Rep. Kilcoyne and the other representatives I have the privilege to serve with. Just in terms of district, I represent about 60% of the majority of the city of Worcester. I also have the privilege of representing Berlin, Bolton, West Boylston, Boylston, and Northborough, all inclusive of all those towns. Fortunately, in the redistricting, Berlin and Bolton got added into the 1st Worcester district. So I know you previously had Senator Cronin. I still have the privilege of working with him in the Senate. But I've been able to be fortunate to have these 2 towns included into this district. And I'm really, certainly want to echo what Rep. Kilcoyne said. This to me is government transparency. I often felt frustrated before getting in the legislature. It feels like, at least in Worcester, that city government is what's talked about on the news or on the Twitter and sites like that, and the mainstream news really focuses on the federal government and everything that is or is not happening there, but that state government is really, in so many ways, kind of a black hole. There's not much coverage of it. You have really good legislators that come in from time to time that really are intentional about engaging with constituents. I've had the privilege of being able to serve alongside Rep. Kilcoyne and others that really are intentional around that. But this is so important. It's about connecting those dots because so much that happens in state government, as many of the folks here know in Berlin, that it really does have a direct impact on your day-to-day lives. And so to me, this is how we can be more transparent, how we can engage, how we can be here to talk to you about how and why we voted on things, issues that we're really passionate about and are really focusing on, and be able to share information and like Rep. Kilcoyne said, really get information. we can tell by the questions you ask even what's on your mind, what your passions are, what your concerns are, what's keeping you up at night, where you want to see us voting on issues. And so that's really, really important. So I do want to thank everyone that came out here tonight. I want to thank Evie and 19 Carter for hosting us, and everyone, hopefully lots and lots of people that are watching at home and sent in some questions ahead of time. So thank you so much, and happy to be part of the dialogue.
Great. All right, I have the big questions here. Are we ready? What have you done for us this year? No, I'm just kidding. That's later, right, Peg? So I think I'm going to start with the second question, which is what bills were passed this year that you think may be of interest to us? So, like you said, we don't get much information about the State House unless we seek it out. So does something come to mind, or 10 bills that you think might affect Berlin?
I mean, I think I just want to add the senator and myself. I know you have a newsletter and social media, and I do as well. If you guys, before you leave here, I encourage you to sign up for it, because that can give you updates on what's going on in the State House, so you don't have to feel the need to look for it all the time. I feel like I'm going to miss a few things, but I know that a big bill that was passed with both the House and Senate was the Affordable Homes Act. That is going to impact every community in the Commonwealth, including Berlin. The hope is that it's going to create tools for municipalities to try to better address the housing crisis that we're seeing across the state. What specific policies that will impact Berlin are going to depend still a lot on the local control that the town has. The town of Berlin will have specific zoning and water and sewer restrictions that will impact sort of where their housing future is. But the hope is with the Affordable Homes Act is that we're going to be able to invest money to help municipalities if they choose to ramp up housing, but do so in a way that hopefully respects the community that they all live in. That's one off the top of my head, but we, throughout the legislative process, in both annual budgets, there was a lot of legislation and policies and grants within those that we funded that I know the town of Berlin has been able to access, including work that both of our offices did to secure direct earmarks for the town as well. I want to say, and I may be blanking on this number, but I know between FY24 and FY25, I think in working together with our offices, we got maybe anywhere between roughly around $100,000 in direct money, I think. But all that is to say, in small ways, there are going to be investments that will be going directly to the town of Berlin, and I think things like the Affordable Homes Act we're gonna see the impact here as well as across the state.
And just to add on to that, I think particularly within the Affordable Homes Act, I know there's some of the policy pieces that will benefit the town of Berlin, and some that will add for conversation. Certainly, the ADU by right zoning is going to have an impact on every community in the Commonwealth, and certainly has an impact as we see our aging population. That we see a lot of folks are looking to downsize, and ADUs are one really valuable tool.
I don't think they know what those are.
Oh, accessory dwelling units. So thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. We
Sometimes known
back
as
here,
like granny homes. I heard somebody refer to them as. They're, if you had a basement or something that you wanted to convert into like a little apartment, or a one room thing that you wanted to add onto a main primary house. So it's not like a split level. It has to be within 900 square feet, and it has to be attached to the primary house. But you sort of see it already, but there's discrepancies on how it's zoned across the Commonwealth. And this bill hopefully will allow for more folks who want to build these to build it, but also it is going to still be dependent on like access to water and certain zoning in individual communities.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. The other big components of the Affordable Homes Act, which is really important, as it is a bond bill, it includes significant bonding for multiple types of housing, right? We talk a lot about affordable housing and what that means, but there's also investments for low-income housing. There's investments for looking at workforce housing, which we know is a lot of where middle-class families, middle-income families have been priced out of markets, and this is really about investing in multi-income type development. There's also a huge piece in it that's around housing preservation. We know our housing stock in New England is old, And we know that for a lot of individuals or families that the sheer cost of maintaining their housing. In Worcester, I know alone, because they've done some work on this, roof replacement alone, which they unfortunately know because insurance agents are now using drones to scope roofs. But because of that, they know that at least $500 million of new roofs are needed in the city of Worcester alone. And so we know that for families to be able to have access to resources that'll help them preserve and upkeep their homes will allow them to be able to stay in those homes longer. I think another really important bill that'll benefit a lot in our community is the tax bill that was passed. Now, I'll be the first to say, and it was my first real lesson in understanding that I don't always get everything I want as a legislature, and that sometimes for the benefit of, majority of things in the bill, I have to vote for everything in the bill. And so there's some components that I was not supportive of including, but that ended up in the final bill. But I will say things like the senior circuit tax break, which was doubled, is going to be a very big benefit. The doubling of the child independent tax credit is a huge benefit to our working families that have been struggling since the pandemic in particular. So really looking at ways, Title V septic tax credits that's included in the tax bill is going to be, for communities that are on septic systems, going to be incredibly important. I think those are really important bills. There's another bill which I think is really important to all of our communities, is the maternal health bill that we've passed, which it's important for a couple reasons. One, because it's about directly impacting or addressing the disparities that exist around maternal morbidities, where we know Black women in particular, unfortunately, are 3 times more likely than white women to suffer loss during labor and delivery or through postpartum depression. But I think what's important about this bill is that it also looks at addressing one tiny component of our medical care system, where we know, and until we can find the day where we can get private equity out of our hospitals altogether, we know that we really are going to have a long time struggle with a lot of our for-profit hospitals, where we see a lot of our hospitals, including nonprofit hospitals, really closing their certain departments. Like we just had a battle up in Leominster where UMass closed their birthing unit, for example. What the maternal health bill does, I think, is also give us a blueprint for how we can deliver healthcare differently. It's about investing in community-based birthing centers, so that, again, part of that strategy to address disparities is making sure that there's care available in community. And it's also about creating a regulatory process for access to midwives and doulas, which is a type of maternal care that many women seek but aren't able to actually get today, or it's not a regulated system, so it's somewhat concerning in terms of what they can seek. And so while that may not impact everyone directly in that specific care here, I think it's important because looking to the future, we're going to have to look at a lot of our systems as they had existed pre-COVID that weren't always great, but we know post-COVID we really have to be innovative on how we deliver care. So I think there's 14, I think I counted, major bills that we passed, and then a whole host of kind of smaller independent bills, and some that are unfortunately still pending in the legislature that hopefully our colleagues are diligently working out the details on. But I do know, for example, one of those cases, the economic development bill, there's $250,000 for the Berlin public safety upgrades that are needed. So we're pushing to make sure that bill gets to the finish line before the end of session.
Yeah, I noticed both of you have mentioned bills that did not pass in the formal session. The formal session ended July 31st, which a miracle occurred, and July 31st lasted into August 1st. Am I right? Okay. So it took 2 years for you all, and you couldn't pass large, very important bills like the economic development bill. You mentioned hospital oversight. That didn't pass. Very little usually passes after the formal session ends. Now, I'm sympathetic to your dilemma. You sit and nothing comes out. And this has happened for years. I have been advocating. I'm wearing my 350 Central Mass t-shirt, one of the many huge and hugely important to everybody in this state, let alone this district, is the climate bill. Did not pass. Thank you.
So Charlene,
So I'm sympathetic to your problem. You sit and nothing passes, nothing comes out. And I have to say, I figured it out. The legislature is constipated. And I have a suggestion for you, because I want you to be able to serve us as opposed to twiddling your thumbs for 2 years, every session, not just this session. I suggest that Representative Turcoing vote for rules that publish the votes from the House, that publish the committee votes and publish the bill votes. This is, you may have noticed, it's not just because the State House doesn't get covered, it's because the House forbids publication of those votes. And then you may have voted in the primary, and there was no competition. There was no one opposed either these candidates, and you are candidates this year. People, they like to pretend they're not. This is across the board, across the state. Our legislature is famously one of the most non-transparent, secretive legislatures in the country. We rank very low to the bottom. Not transparent and not productive. We pass the least.
Can I respond to
Thank you,
your
Charlene.
question, Charlene?
let's let them answer, okay? Because we don't have that much time.
I did not come up with this stuff.
So first off, I want to encourage everybody here, yourself included, Charlene, that if you want to know about any of my committee votes, I am happy to share those votes with you. Committees oftentimes see about hundreds of bills go through the committee process. So for anybody that feels they need to know where I stand on any individual bill, whether or not it's before a committee I sit in, I welcome you to reach out to my office. Happy to let you know if I have a position on it, or more importantly, to see where you stand on any particular bill. I do want to address the idea that we are sitting around waiting for legislation to come out. I hear your frustration, and I sympathize with especially if you're advocating for a particular piece of legislation that is still being negotiated, that can be incredibly frustrating. It's frustrating for us as well. That said, throughout the legislative session, we are always advocating for our communities, talking with our colleagues, talking with our chairs, talking with advocates, talking with members of the public to make sure that the legislation we pass is going to be the best possible legislation for the Commonwealth. Our system certainly isn't perfect, but I do strongly believe that each and every one, both of us here, I think it's safe to say, are always pushing for our constituencies, pushing for and advocating for our districts. Negotiating is hard and it can be tough. And right now our colleagues in the House and Senate are diligently at work having those conversations to try to get some of those outstanding bills to the floor. But there's 200 of us. There's 160 legislators and 40 senators. All of us have different needs that we're trying to get done, and sometimes that can run into some tough conversations. Throughout the informal sessions, we are in informal sessions in the House, and I think the Senate as well, at least twice a week, where work is still being done. And we're going to continue to be doing work right up until December 31st. So I do hear your frustration, but I do want to make sure that all of you know that we're an open book. We're here right now talking to you because we want to be able to hear directly from you and have this back and forth. And if anybody feels that they want more information from my office or where I stand, always feel free to reach out or ask me.
No, and I appreciate that. And I quite honestly, 3 years ago today, I was the chief operating officer at the YWCA, and saw our problem, got a few community partners together, and we jumped in and we fixed the problem. So moving to this position has certainly been an adjustment in how processes take time. But I do think, and we can always find ways to be more transparent, and I'm open to understanding how there's additional ways. I would acknowledge we don't have opponents. I don't know why. We can't. Anyone can run. That's certainly part of the process. We're here tonight, even though we're not candidates. This isn't a candidate forum, but we're here as a legislative forum to be here and to be present and to answer tough questions. We want to be able to have, again, as she said, to have that conversation. To put a fine point, and I think some of it is I don't understand it from folks that have been in the legislature longer. It seems like it is getting increasingly challenging to get stuff done. I don't know why that is. Hopefully the longer we're there, maybe other people that replace us and can do it, that we can start to change that dynamic. I'm happy to do what we can to do so and to try to change that dynamic. But I want to give an example from my perspective of the process. So I was the Senate chair of the Joint Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities. There are 176 bills that were sent to our committee. Every single one of those bills was born out of some tragedy from a family suffered, or in some way sought to simplify our really burdensome and complex state systems, right? So none of them were easy bills. None of them were light bills. We had 11 hearings, which took almost 6 months to be able to go through the entire hearing process so that the public had the ability to speak on every one of those bills. Through the course of working weekly with my co-chair in the House and advocates, we were able to put forward a comprehensive omnibus package for child welfare. It took us weeks to work between the Department of Children and Families, the Children's League, which is the provider network, and SEIU, which is the labor union that's social workers, to be able to come to an agreement on language where someone could say, okay, this feels right, or no, this is going to have an unintended consequence over here. It took us 2 years of working diligently on this bill to get this omnibus package together.
How many of these bills had been introduced in previous sessions?
A few of them. I can't speak to previous sessions. I wasn't here.
I imagine many of them.
Correct. For a few of them.
That is the history of our legislature.
Right. I'm not part of the history of our legislature. Rep. Kilcoyne's not part of the extensive history. So we're hoping to make it better.
She is.
Okay, so
I did work on a legislative committee before being elected, and the whole committee process I think is quite complex, and there are reasons that the chairs have some discretion over things such as testimony. One of the bills that was before the Public Safety Committee when I worked on it dealt with undocumented immigrants, and organization that was named by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group tried to get every single name of every undocumented immigrant that testified. We did not let them have it. So, I mean, that's just one example, but I think the senator and myself, we're united in advocating for our communities here. And while there's always going to be disagreement in both within the House, within our respective chambers, and between the two chambers, we are focused and committed on serving everybody here. And yeah, we'll go to the next one.
Sorry.
Okay.
We appreciate the comment. I think they heard you. So let's move on so that everyone gets a chance to ask questions. The submitted questions, we're going to jump to the bottle bill. So this would be asked of you. Where is the bottle bill? Why? The question is, why aren't we having water bottles included? Why is it 5 cents when it should be 10 cents? You know the details. What's going on with that?
So the bottle bill passed the Senate. That said, I'm going to probably give what's an unpopular opinion. I don't believe the bottle bill works. Because in the 1980s, when the bottle bill came into effect, there was not municipal recycling programs like there are today. What we see here in our communities is that more people are inclined to recycle through their municipal, putting their cans in the bin that goes on the corner of their house, rather than going to redemption centers. There is less evidence when compared to communities that have municipal recycling programs that more people would be inclined to recycle if there was additional items that are eligible and if it went from 5 cents to 10 cents. Now, people that currently use redemption centers would. they would benefit because they could bring more products and they could get an additional nickel. There is an impact, which I think we have to look at a whole picture and understand on distributors in terms of the cost and the handling fee for returning the bottles. I'm all for eliminating plastics. I'm all for incentivizing manufacturers to eliminate and requiring and moving in that direction towards eliminating plastics. We in the Senate passed a Plastics Reduction Act, which would move towards eliminating single-use plastics. A lot of the things that exist today that really are unnecessary, like the plastic bag with the fork, the knife, the salt and pepper packets. If I had a choice, I would outright ban nip bottles. I think those are, a single-use plastic that cause a whole significant amount of a lot of waste. So if, again, I don't think that necessarily people are going to be incentivized to bring them to a redemption center for a dime. We should look at outright eliminating the use of them. But I think what we should do is invest in these municipal recycling programs. There's an organization in Worcester that works with individuals that have engaged with the criminal justice system, 18 to 24-year-olds that are trying to get out of that, gang involvement in the criminal justice system, and they're constantly looking at social entrepreneurship opportunities. They approached our office with a proposal to be able to, they've created an app to be able to give families or give institutions, large buildings, buckets that they could then go around and collect, and they'd be able to collect the fee on it, which would help their program, help these young men that they're working with, and also because from a social experiment perspective, we might be more likely to drop our can in that bucket if we know it's going to a better good. That would maybe incentivize more people to recycle their plastic. So it did pass the Senate. I can't say that I'm a huge supporter of it because I think there's alternative strategies that might better incentivize people to recycle, or let's just get rid of plastics altogether.
Does that answer sort of your question too, AJ, about climate? Or
the climate, there were 5 climate bills
yeah.
that were at least supported to this state. And and you're right. The whole business of recycling plastic is a myth. And say, well, we make plastic lumber out of it. And as soon as you touch the soil of that lumber, you've created a cloud of microplastics, which are now being found in human brain tissue, heart tissue, liver. We're killing ourselves. We've got to get the stuff done. Period. Thank you.
So you're working on it.
Thank you.
Right, you're working on it. Okay. Let's just get through some of these other questions, and then we'll open it up to if there's any more questions in the back there, maybe. Okay. We talked about the ADU. That was one of the questions. Is there any legislation that affects our right to farm community?
So off the top of my head, I don't think the bill, like a right to farm bill, was before the House, and I don't think the Senate either. But what I will say is agricultural issues have been incredibly important, I think, for the legislature. I know there's a lot of farmers here in Berlin and in other communities I represent that need a little bit of help. And I think if you've seen, especially within the budget for both the past 2 budgets actually, there's been significant funding in place for grant programs that are aimed at supporting farmers in the community. So things like grants that will help farmers get equipment that they need, special equipment to deal with the climate crisis. We've seen over the years that our weather has become a bit more unstable. Was it last summer or 2 summers ago? We had the huge floods. I believe it was last summer that caused devastation for so many of our farmers, and the legislature passed, I think it was $25 million in emergency assistance for our farmers across the Commonwealth, including several here in central Massachusetts. And we're continuing to, I think, see supportive programs such as not just emergency, but just to make sure that we're allowing our farmers to maintain the ability to just be valued members here in the community. Our farmers are hugely important in providing fresh produce, not just for folks that want to buy it at farmers markets, but also supplying fresh access to food for underprivileged families and for hunger insecure families right here in Central Mass. I've worked with several organizations in Central Mass, Growing Places being one that comes to mind, that creates packages for families that are in need of assistance, so they have access to fresh produce. We know how important that is to maintaining everybody's health. If you can get fresh food versus processed food, you're going to be able to provide you and those in your family with a far more nutritional and substantial diet. So we certainly want to continue to support our farmers. While that particular we haven't done like an agricultural omnibus piece, but there's certainly been other bills that have contained a lot of, I think, important policy in the agricultural space.
And one thing one of the opportunities I had was to be a member of the Agriculture Committee as well this year. Representative Kate Hogan, Speaker Pro Tem Kate Hogan, who represents Bolton, who I share Bolton with, and Senator Joe Comerford from Western Mass, co-chaired the 21st Century Agricultural Commission. And I think to much of Rep. Kilcoyne's point of we know farming today isn't the same as it has been. One of the challenges farmers face is succession planning and how to be able to maintain continuity in their farming. There's a lot, costs have skyrocketed across the board, and so understanding how they can sustain their farming practices or modify the types of farming that they do. And so this commission is going to be coming out with a report. It's actually started in 2020. It's going to be coming out with a report in the next few months, which is going to lead to legislation to how to help sustain farms. But I think an interesting point when we go talk about the debate piece and a debate and how moving legislation forward, I was visiting a farm in Bolton last week, and the farmer who owns the farm was sharing that his concerns with the climate bill and some of the emission standards. And in talking to I forget his name, but he's from UMass Extension School, that there's real challenges for farmers, especially small town community farmers, and some of their large scale equipment that requires diesel. And so transitioning to more sustainable or meeting the emission standards that we set out in the climate bill is going to be really cost prohibitive to those farmers. Is it good environmental policy? Absolutely. Do we also have to think strategically about how we're supporting our farmers in transitioning to those more sustainable fuel sources? And so it just speaks to that. We think things make so much sense and we want to move forward quickly, but there's always these other impacts that we have to look at addressing. And so there's absolutely bills that have impact on farmers that may not be directly targeted to farmers.
Can I quickly add one more thing, Evie? I just would quickly add to the senator's point that, while we start looking at ways and how to create legislation, we're also trying to, in the short term, think of ways to help younger farmers. So there's a grant program that awarded funding for farmers that I think were under the age of 30 or 25, because we are seeing a lot of younger people are not going into the industry. So looking at ways to make sure that for young people that want to, make a living becoming a farmer and are sort of keeping this industry going in the short term, we're trying to provide any help we can to them as well.
Okay.
Just a quick statement. I just wanted to say, one, thank you for the assistance last year. It really helped us. I know I'm a very small farm. I also wanted to say thank you so much for over the past couple of years, you've been expanding the HIP program and the Mass Farmers Market Coupon Program. And on behalf of my farm and my customers, thank you for that.
Thank you, and thank you for being here.
All right, this is I think it's our last question here, and then we'll go to other questions. Maybe Jane had something. I know Peg might have had something. So we still have few minutes. Completely different topic. What is happening in the state and in our district with immigrants? Is there funding? Are they being housed? Can they work?
Yeah, so I have the opportunity by my committee assignment to be part of a newly created Emergency Assistance Commission. I think this is a 3-hour dissertation, so I'll try to keep it very short because there's a lot of work we need to do. Massachusetts is the only right to shelter state in the country. New York is a right to shelter city. It's about the same size as Massachusetts. But we're very unique in that. I'm very proud of the fact that we're unique in that because that was created in the 80s to say we as a Commonwealth believe no child should be rendered homeless to the streets. Now, how that program has been administered over the years has been very complicated and unfortunately unnecessarily burdensome for families that need help to be able to access help. What we saw a year ago when we saw an influx of families fleeing violence, fleeing crisis in Haiti, coming to America, often through South American countries, coming to Massachusetts, because of the sheer numbers of individuals and families that were coming at the same time, mostly families, the system was, the families were put through emergency assistance. Let me start by saying we need to welcome as many families to our communities as possible. There is not an industry in our Commonwealth that is not desperate for employees right now. There is not a workforce that has not seen a complete depletion since the pandemic. We need new workers. And every day that new families are arriving, the first thing they're asking for is work permits. If we're talking about immigration is a whole big conversation, and talking about what the federal government needs to do to step up to help us fix the system as a whole is a whole big conversation. But if we're talking about what we're hearing today in terms of the crisis, the vast majority of families that are coming are actually very quickly leaving the shelter system, going into housing, getting work. You know, we have an example, we both share the town of Northborough. 29 families were placed in July in that shelter. By January, 22 of those 29 families were in housing, working full-time, and they're working in places like nursing homes. The WRTA in Worcester has partnered with Accentria to be able to help, because they do their whole CDL licensing in-house, to be able to partner with some supports around ESL programming and other types of coaching and mentoring to then train. They now have 3 new employees who are newly arrived individuals who are now part of their workforce. I know we talk about wanting to expand the WRTA footprint. We need drivers to be able to do that. And so we do need this workforce to continue, and they are overwhelmingly over 90% are going into get their work authorization. Now, the challenge is the federal government, right? Because the barrier comes at the federal government. So we do need to work very closely. We need our federal government to step up and actually start making it easier to get these work authorizations processed. We also have to fix the entirety of our shelter system, which is broken for families that have been here for a long time, as well as it is for families that are newly arriving. And we also have to think in that process around how we're supporting families with what they need when they're presenting and asking for help. And unfortunately, shelter is the most costly of the forms of support we can give, but that is what overwhelmingly our system is pushing families through, to be able to access a little bit of rental assistance or be able to access a little bit of job training support or whatever they need. So there's a whole lot we can do. There's a whole lot. This commission is working to have a report out by December so that it could influence budgeting this coming fiscal year, so we can start to look at a better way of providing support, which helps people get into housing and into the workforce, as well as for families that have been here for a long time and have extensive barriers like eviction records or long-term unemployment or medical crises or mental health issues that are going to take a lot more support to be able to move into housing or to be able to stay sustainably housed.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, like the senator noted, the law that we're talking about, the emergency shelter law, has been in place for over 40 years. There are immigrants that have accessed this program, but also a lot of people that have been in Massachusetts for their whole lives that access this program too. I think it's really important to know when you talk about immigration, especially in the context of the state, this is immigration at its core is a federal issue. The state of Massachusetts is not going to be conducting any border checks at the boundary lines to see who's coming in and where they come from. We, as the senator said, had a commitment in Massachusetts that if there is a pregnant woman in her 3rd trimester or a family with young children, we will make sure they get emergency shelter. And that's why we're seeing some of these, the housing shortage really create a strain on our current system. And we definitely need to do a lot of work on that. In the short term, we've tried to provide funding to maintain the current shelter system so we can address the current need. But we are seeing many of people who are migrants that are here legally. They are going through the emergency shelter system, but they are going on to have jobs and have stable housing that are not at this expense of the taxpayer. So I think we are committed to doing what we can here in Massachusetts to make sure we're serving everybody within our borders. But the federal government, does have to do their job. And if we do want to see changes in our current immigration system, that is something that Congress has to work out. And until then, you know, we're going to do what we can to help the people here in Massachusetts.
All right, that brings us to the end of our listed questions, but I know there's some out in the hall here. Ken?
Can you hear me all?
Yes.
Yeah. My question, I hope, is simple. I'm interested in knowing from each of you, over the last session, which is a 2-year session, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
What bill or bills, I want 2 or 3 examples from each of you, didn't get passed that you passionately wished had? What got missed that's on your list?
So it's a good question because there's a lot of bills filed. There's one that I filed in particular that would basically, I'm working on it with the American Cancer Society, and it's a bill that would remove prior authorization from something called biomarker testing, which is a technology that can actually, it's not just cancer, it's other rare diseases, Alzheimer's patients can benefit this, but they can use your genetic, basically look at your genetics and figure out what the best course of treatment can be for you. We've seen that this technology can really help in a lot of, it can rule out treatment that's not going to be effective, and it can make sure that you're having the least invasive, most effective treatment possible. So we didn't get that over the finish line. There's some healthcare bills, it goes through a slightly different process where, in addition to having to go through the legislative committee, the Center for Health Information and Analysis has to issue a report on the fiscal impact of every healthcare bill that we file in the state. It's a way in which we can be sure that we're trying to not balloon costs. So we were really, even though we didn't get that over the finish line, I was really hopeful. This is the second session it's been filed. It got reported out of the Financial Services Committee. It got a tier report that we got back in May, and then it got reported favorably from the Healthcare Financing Committee. We didn't get it to a House floor vote, but I did file it as an amendment to one of the healthcare bills that we voted on. But it didn't make it to the final bill. The good news is, though, we got a lot of my colleagues in the House learned about what it does. A lot signed on to the amendment, and so we feel really hopeful. We made great progress this session, and going into next session, we're going to continue to try to. We're going to start from a really strong place. So that's one example of a bill that, even though it didn't make it over the finish line, I feel very optimistic about its future. To answer your second question, this might be a little cheating, but I really hope to see that we get a healthcare bill done. I'm really happy we did maternal health care. I think that was incredibly important, and I'm so proud of our colleagues, both in the House and Senate, for getting that done, especially given the national conversation around women's health care and abortion rights and what's on the table federally. That will, I think, make a big difference in access to health care for a lot of people here, but we do need to do more. Like the senator referenced earlier, we've seen the closures of Leominster Maternity Ward last summer. We're seeing it in Neshoba right now. The Steward healthcare crisis, I think, created a lot of made an already complicated conversation even more complex. So I really hope that if we get something done soon, because I really want to make sure. One thing I'm passionate about is making sure people in the Commonwealth can access the healthcare they need and deserve.
So there's a lot. Just 3 is tough, but I'll start with 3 out of my committee that I'll start with. I wish they got done sooner. I'm hopeful that before December 31st, there's a chance we can get them done. One is the omnibus child welfare bill that I mentioned, which it really is. It's about helping to fix. There's a lot of work we need to do with the child welfare system. And this would go a long way in a multitude. It ended up being 13 bills altogether that got compiled into this omnibus bill after a lot of work with my co-chair in the House and several others that I mentioned earlier. So I'm hoping that gets passed. There's another bill that impacts directly children who are in the foster care system. You may have read there was an article several months ago about the fact that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts holds on to SSI benefits that children in the foster care system, and it goes into the general fund in the Commonwealth. There's a bill, there's something called ABLE accounts there's a bill that would require DCF to set up these accounts for those children so that their money could be maintained in these accounts. So when they age out of foster care, they're doing so with an account with funding in it to be able to help them transition into adulthood. I'm really hopeful that bill can get passed. And then the third bill, which may seem simple in the grand complexity of the bills that we have, but I think is really important. It's referred to as the R word bill. But what it does is go through all of Mass General Law and strike out all harmful language referring to individuals. So it's person first language. So particularly for persons with disabilities, it would change our laws, which I think is important. That speaks to who we are, that our laws are reflective of being person centered and really getting rid of some of the archaic language. The House has passed it, so I'm hopeful that the Senate will take it up and it can get to the governor before the end of the session. If not, I'm really hoping that our committee can get it out early. There's certainly a lot of bills that I filed in my first term that this was a good learning year of how to get bills moved around, get them attached as amendments. And so I'm looking forward to going into my second term, actually knowing how to maneuver some of that and being able to work now on fixing some of the challenges in some of the bills to be able to put them in a better position going forward. But those are three right off the top that are in part of my committee that I would be really hopeful we can get done.
Did you want to ask?
Yes, Jane, yes. I'm a landlord. I believe you voted to seal the eviction list. Only 4% of tenants are ever evicted. However, it is a chronic problem, and as a landlord, if we cannot see the eviction list, we're really severely hampered. That usually the rents are never paid. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars. To me, sealing the eviction list gives a carte blanche to this 4% of the tenants. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. So, in these bills, there are usually a lot of different policies in there. And so I understand your position, especially given where you are as a landlord, that's a difficult policy for you to get behind. But the housing bill, we heard from a lot of different folks, including the landlords, on a variety of policy issues. So we certainly hear you on that particular policy that was in the housing bill, and that is signed into law. But we welcome you to, if there's other ways we can help deal with some of the struggles that you're seeing, we always welcome you to call my office and let us know, what's going on or other bills you think might be of interest to you.
Do you know what the reasoning was behind that? That might help us.
So a lot of advocates that were pushing for eviction sealing argued that if you had been evicted in the past, it made it very difficult to access housing, particularly because there'd be a resistance to wanting to sign a tenant who had been evicted previously. So advocates for that policy argued successfully, ultimately, that the eviction ceiling would help make sure that there wasn't the people that had unfortunately gone through an eviction could access housing more easily. So that was why that particular piece was included.
Yeah, I would absolutely. And I think when you look at our emergency shelter system, majority of families in there are there because of evictions. Oftentimes for non-payment of rent, oftentimes no-fault evictions that they're in the system, in the emergency shelter system. I think we need to figure out a better system that helps us. This goes to the how do we fix the problem as a whole that supports. During the pandemic, the emergency rental assistance program that was created was to me a perfect model. It actually meant the payments went either the tenant or the landlord could actually apply, and the payments went to the landlord directly. So if a tenant, because of the pandemic in particular, but in general, fell behind or it lost their job or had a major medical incident and got behind in rent, there could be a supportive program that would help them catch up, go to the landlord directly so that there were no issues with the landlord not getting a payment. To me, there should be no evictions for non-payment of rent, especially when those end up in families going into the shelter system when the average rental assistance during that period was in Worcester, so the second largest city, for a year was $7,700. In the same city, for for 9 months of shelter, it cost the state $47,000. So we need to be better at creating a process that better supports families and landlords in the process, that actually, at the end of the day, saves the Commonwealth money and is more thoughtful and intentional. So I think while that piece is there, I think there are also ways we can help landlords and instead of creating a us versus them mentality, create a better kind of process for everyone to be whole and housed.
Yeah, and I think the housing bill is just one step. We need to continue talking about different policies that are going to help the housing crisis that we're dealing with, including ways to support landlords and making sure that you can provide, if you own multiple properties, that you can actually provide rental housing opportunities for folks too.
All right, we have time for a couple more questions, maybe 3. So 1, 2, 3. Peg, you're on.
I had the opportunity a couple months ago to meet with members of your staff when they were here and shared with them that Berlin had spent a significant amount of money on doing assessments of our town buildings. I don't think it came as a shock when the reports came back that a lot of the buildings were poor, stop laughing, had lived past their life expectancy. And to fix them or to tear them down is a pretty substantial chunk of money. We can't keep going to capital to say, hey, you got 50 grand so we can take a building down. Hey, you got 200 grand so we can fix a roof, fix plumbing. What can you do to help us secure money for these buildings? Like, I know that the library in Clinton got a nice chunk of change to help do theirs out of the library, over there. Would love to help them as much as possible. But what can we expect, ask, hope for from the state to start to offset some of those costs that the town desperately needs, that we can't go to the taxpayers and say, hey, can you fork over an extra?
Yeah, I think, in the short term, for some of the short-term projects, that is something that we can be helpful in, and we have in different pieces through the annual budget where we can earmark and we go to Kristen and the other town administrators and say, what are kind of the priorities that you want us to be able to fight for? And then we usually work together to say, if it got in the House, I'll work on something else in the Senate or kind of partner in that way, like I mentioned. And hopefully I feel very confident that the economic development bill will happen in this session, and that there will be a significant earmark for the public safety building. In the long term, we really have to create a structure similar to the school building authority. We have to figure out how to put more money into the school building authority, but we also have we have to build something similar for public buildings, because your story in Berlin is every single town. I mean, we have a police department in Boylston that's crumbling, that they can't even have people in because it's in such disrepair. And so that's the story across our Commonwealth. And so we have to create infrastructure and then create a financing mechanism similar to the school building, where it's a penny on the sales tax or whatever the case may be, that we're designating a revenue into it annually, so that we actually have millions of dollars that we can help to distribute to our communities on an annual basis. Because even with the bond bills that we have, we're not going to be able to meet across the bond bills, across our communities, meet the infrastructure needs that we have. And so I know there's been some work in the legislature over the last few years trying to create such a structure, but that's definitely something we have to push forward, or else we'll never be able to really fund the need.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And we've also, I think, recognized that towns like Berlin and a lot of the towns that we share just don't have the same access to the tax base that some of the bigger cities do. So we know that you're making pretty much every penny stretch as far as you can in your budgets. And that's a huge problem when you're dealing with, like the senator said, you need a new public safety building, you need a new school, you need a new library. We have started to have conversations with the administration about that, especially in Boylston in particular, and we'd be happy to connect Berlin with her as well. But Ann Goby came out just to kind of try to raise awareness of this issue, regardless of whether or not Berlin fits the definition of rural community. I've seen so many definitions. I think I've seen definitions where it does and some where it doesn't. But regardless, we know that Berlin is a small town where you don't have, massive commercial buildings where you're getting that tax base. So how can we best serve communities like Berlin to make sure that you're getting the, just a little bit of help to make sure that your town and municipal buildings can do the function that we need them to do. In terms of the Clinton Library, I'd be happy to connect you with them because they're going through a grant process right now with, I want to say, the Mass Library Association, and I may not have the specifics on that. They're still kind of in the process of figuring out what to do with their library because I think they've made some positive steps, but like here, it's a big question of that's an old historic building. Do you take it down? Do you build a new one? It's got to be whatever's going to be the most feasible. And even though Clinton is a much different town than Berlin, they have a lot of competing needs as well. So I think, like the senator said, short term, please make sure that whenever you have information about what earmark assistance might be the most beneficial. We'll certainly work together with our offices to get that over the finish line if there's a funding opportunity to do so. And long term, we want to continue working with our colleagues to really address and create a program, I think, like Mass School Buildings Association, because it's definitely not just Berlin. I'm seeing it in all the other towns I represent, and I know many of our colleagues are seeing it too.
Thank you very much. Sue?
So if I get back to the ADUs and affordable housing for a minute, I think it's great and it's much needed and it will be a great service. However, as a zoning board member, our concern is that this town worked really hard to get over 10% affordable housing, and it's hard in a really small town. And from what I'm understanding, these ADUs that will now be allowed on residential properties do not count towards affordable housing. So there is the potential to easily wipe out 10% and drop us down below 10% in a short amount of time because it's such a small town. There doesn't, I think when they made the bill, they were thinking of larger towns, say like Concord. But there's no sort of gradation for what you're talking about, workforce housing. It's either affordable housing, which is subsidized, or it counts against, and you have to get your percentages back again. And it seems like there should have been a middle ground in there for these new accessory dwelling units. We do have a lot of the granny flats, the in-law apartments, and all of that. Some of them will qualify under this new law. Some of them will still be under the old in-law apartments because they're too large. But I think there's a real concern that while it will do good, it may create sort of a snowball effect of having to play catch up with the subsidized affordable housing to stay above that 10%.
Yeah, and I think, kudos to Berlin at 17%. I mean, you're well above the 10% requirement. And I think that's, it's a shining example. And you've done so in home purchasing too, which I think is really, in building affordable home ownership, which is really important. That's an interesting kind of perspective. I don't think, there's not going to be certainly, and that's something we'll certainly work with the state on, a direct correlation of, penalizing a community because of a change in percentage because of ADUs being developed. I think that I don't foresee in any community that there's going to be, a rush of producing a whole lot more ADUs that would drastically change overnight the percentages. I think in part this came into being because so many communities were using zoning to prohibit, to keep out because of some mentality around changing culture of the neighborhood or changing the dynamic or really kind of discriminatory practices coded in other language. And so it really was about making it more accessible because the majority of use of those units are for family purposes. I can speak firsthand. We just built in my sister's house in Upton an in-law apartment for my mom. And it's a great multi-generational approach where she's there to care for my 4-year-old niece and they're there to make sure she's okay through the winters. And they built it so that she can age safely in place there. And so when we talk about not having enough housing stock, I was surprised when I was first campaigning around the communities, having come and spent all my life in Worcester, that what I was hearing most from particularly older population was that they wanted to downsize. They wanted to sell their multi-acre, multi-bedroom home and downsize somewhere smaller, but there was nowhere in their community to be able to do that. And so this was part of that overall housing production strategy. But I think we can certainly address with the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities that sense that it would harm a town against their affordability.
Yeah, if you would actually, I feel like this would be a valuable conversation to continue, because is this guidance that you've already gotten from the state, or is this just concerns based on the statute that was passed?
Last Tuesday, there was a webinar with some attorneys, and I don't know if it was the executive office of all those letters that are
Yeah, housing and livable communities, yeah.
But they went through it, and they were very adamant about, no, if someone were to put in ADU, then you've got now 2 residences that you have to.
Yeah, the reason I'm curious is because I remember there was a lot of talk prior to when we voted on it in the House, and even, just conversations I had with colleagues. I served as the vice chair of the housing committee, so I was in the 10-hour hearing we had, and we were on the floor trying to figure some of this stuff out. There was, at least when we passed it, I can say in the House, it was very clear that an ADU was not going to change the status of a house into a multifamily. That an ADU must by definition be attached to a primary unit, and that still would be considered a single family. So, because I remember there was a lot of back and forth of is an ADU going to suddenly make a single family multifamily, when especially if you're zoning for single family areas. Exactly. So I can say that based on my memory, and I don't have the language in front of me, but that was not really our intention. We didn't want to make ADUs automatically create a multifamily housing. So if you're getting information that conflicts with that, and it's possible maybe I'm misremembering or misread the statute when it passed in the House, or maybe it changed, please let us know, because we'd be happy to get clarity on our end. And even if, that is accurate, and that might not be exactly how we wanted that law to be implemented. So please just, if you're having conversations locally, just feel free to keep us in the loop. We're happy to kind of examine it a little more closely ourselves.
I realize it's new, and everyone's going through the growing pains, and
Yeah.
we're looking for guidance.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, too.
I think it's time to go. It's past 8 o'clock. They gave us an hour of their time. Walter decided not to ask his question. You want to just tell them how great they are?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about housing. I think last year, 23 or something, Berlin, I think, grew at a higher percentage than any other town in the state, the amount of population, so, in housing. So and I think the average person in Berlin, if you talk to them, we have developers that see this beautiful town as a big cash cow. What's happening? They're building these $750,000, $1 million houses, and it's eating up our farmlands. So we need make sure you support anything that supports open space, agricultural preservation, and things like that. And the state has 2 large chunks of land in Berlin that could be better maintained for recreation. They're flood control projects. There are trails on them, and they should be a little bit better maintained. Berlin has become sort of a recreation center for outdoor hiking and stuff. It's the last best town around, but we're losing it. So we need help protecting open space in the environment.
So at the Mass Farmers Bureau legislative breakfast that we were both at in March, I want to say. Did you go to the one in Fitchburg, or were you at a different? Yeah, well, there's a couple of them across the state, but I'm just bringing it up because the land preservation for farmers and agriculture was one of their #1 priorities. I don't think a lot of people realize that a big strain on making sure our farmers can continue to do the work they do, that people can go into the business, is that there's not enough land to farm in the state. So that is, I think, something that is on everybody's radar, especially when it comes to making sure our farmers can keep doing the work they're doing. So appreciate that point.
And I would just add in closing, because I know we need to wrap up, but I think that this is a perfect example, given the conversation, of making sure that as the state we're giving the tools to the municipality, the zoning capacity, the tools, so the preservation capacity, so that municipalities can make the decisions about their own community without us enforcing as much. And then, but also giving, because a lot of things are restricted by law now that we need to give communities and things like, especially like conservation and zoning access to support.
Well, thank you both very much.
Yeah,
It's a
thank you.
pleasure to
Thank
have
you for everybody for coming.